Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for a part two of a three-part webinar series with Tom Deans. Today's topic is building smart estate plans. Coming up, topic on our next webinar is going to be the six top planning ideas, estate planning ideas for that successful families master. So if you missed our first webinar, which was a little while ago, it was based on the book called Every Family's Business. And it was really about transitioning family or closely held businesses to the next generation or the new group of shareholders. That recording is available on our website. Just go to the seminars page and follow the link for the recording. Dr. Deans is joining us today on this Zoom call. I sincerely look forward to his comments. My partners and I have had the pleasure of seeing and hearing Dr. Deans speak on several occasions, and we love his message, and we want to share that with you. Dr. Deans is a New York top 10 author of Every Family's Business and his second book called Willing Wisdom, and that's the book we're going to talk about today. With more than 1 million copies of each of these books sold, the book remains the best-selling family business book of all time in Canada. Tom has delivered more than 1,000 keynote speeches in 26 countries, and we'll be talking about his experience in business transition, as well as drafting wills and estate planning, and that's mainly our focus today. You may have seen Tom on CBC or BNN. So a couple of logistics items. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. I encourage you to use that Q&A box. The questions are being monitored by one of my panelists, and all of your questions will be anonymous. You will not be identified, so feel free to use the Q&A box. We'll get through as many of those questions we can today. Joining me today as panelists are my partners, Richard Poole, Trevor Lukey, and our principal, Darlene Wright. So we'll bring them in as we go along here. So this is a series of three conversations with Tom. We'll send you the invite to our next session, and we look forward to that. We are recording all of these, so we encourage you to have a look at them again. Share them with your friends and business associates, and we really want to get maximum mileage out of Tom's time and his knowledge. So just get back to today's topic. It's about building smart estate plans. And Tom, I do love the cover of your book. I'm just going to, I'm sure everybody may have seen this, but it's a fortune cookie, of course, fortune. And the fortune reads, great conversations await you. So this is so much what Tom's message is. We're going to get into that a little bit here in a second. But Tom, just to begin, just tell me a little bit about your book. Hopefully, you can tell me that Canadians are way ahead of the curve, and we are all okay in terms of drafting our wills.
Oh, Bob, I wish I could start and say we're in great shape. But truly, we are actually in pretty awful shape. We have 12.5 million Canadians who are missing the most important document in an estate plan, and that's a will. And we know that if someone doesn't have a will, they don't have a power of attorney, and they don't have a healthcare directive. So it's a little bit of a downer to start with that kind of stat. But the good news is, I think that this pandemic, there's one of the silver linings is that it has really brought it close to home. There are next gen's children, I say children, adult children, who are deeply worried about their parents and whether or not they've got a will, financial power of attorney, and healthcare directive, because if they end up on a ventilator and they don't have those documents, there's absolutely nothing that those kids can do to advocate for their parents in the hospital. Nothing. And so I think word is spreading that this whole subject has taken on a great urgency during the middle of this global pandemic.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary stat, though, isn't it? That there's so few of us that have wills that are, well, number one, even having a will, never mind being current. When you say a will is current, what's your definition of how often do you revisit your will, for example?
Well, I read my will, well, Bob, here it is. I read it all the time. You know, there are people who couldn't put their hands on their will if they tried. They have to think really long. And I do not know why we get these documents and then squirrel them away, inside air vents and drywall. And it's really odd. But I literally read my will on my birthday. In the book, I call my birthday my will day. It is, birthdays are kind of reflective days, aren't? When we're young, they're awesome. Birthdays are awesome because we're getting presents, right? I'm talking when we're teenagers.
Yep.
Then something happens. All of a sudden, we get into our 40s and our 50s and 60s, and birthdays are like it's a measurement. We're measuring our march towards the end. Like no one's kid. I'm 58. I know I'm playing on the back nine. Like, no, doesn't matter how you do the math. Birthdays are a reflective day, and I think they're great days to consider wills or at least revisit them. A lot of people say you should update your will every 5 years. I do not know. I seriously do not know what it is about 5 years that's magical. There is a lot that can change in 1 year. I changed my will. 1 year, I changed it 3 times. I sold a business. I started a business. There was a death in our family, one of my beneficiaries, and there was a birth in our family, which changed the percentages. So I look. A lot of people write wills and they don't bring a copy home. They leave it at their lawyer's. Seriously, get a copy, bring it home, read it all the time. You don't have to read the whole document. There's just a couple of paragraphs that are really germane.
Right. I know in your book, we'll talk a little bit about, who do you give the will to and all those kinds of things, but I'll bring that up later. I think one of the things that struck me in your book is that this topic applies to everybody. I think you referred to the first will you wrote was when you were 18 years old, and it was because your parents encouraged you to think of these things earlier. So this is not just for those of us that have families. If we have a friend, if we're not married, or we are married, or we have grandchildren, don't have grandchildren, this applies to every single person. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I will give anyone $100 if they can find any reference in this book where when I say family, I immediately say friends. There's a lot of people who don't have kids. There's a lot of people who do have kids, but actually some of them are estranged or living in different countries, and they're not beneficiaries of their estate. Their friends are. So I was very cognizant of that when I wrote that. And there's lots of examples where children have predeceased parents. So all the way through that book, it's always families and friends. I'm always mindful that when I'm writing that book from my perspective, I'm really broadening the definition and the possibilities for what a will can be.
Tom, I'm going to jump into just tying the first session with this one. In the first session, we talked about transitioning businesses, and we talked about maybe leaving the shares of a business or of your corporation to your children or your spouse may just not be the best idea. There may be a different way to look at this. And you referred to that as a contrarian view. Can you tie that session in with this one? And what do I do in my will to tie in your message from our first session?
Yeah, so really what I was talking about in this book, which I know you share with your clients, the first book I wrote, Every Family's Business, it was really a contrarian idea, not to gift your business, your voting shares to your children, but to rather, gift wealth, give cash to your children, and then ask them if they want to risk it and buy that business at full market value. That little maneuver is crucial in really finding out whether the next generation love that business. So what I was finding from that first book was that business owners were sitting down with their children, asking the 12 questions in that book, and finding out, guess what? The children didn't want the business. So that book was leading to a lot of businesses being sold. So there was a liquidity event. And I realized from my audiences and reader feedback that I was solving one problem, business succession planning problem, only to replace it with actually a bigger, far more vexing problem, which is, great, I no longer now have a manufacturing company or a pipeline service company, but I now have $12 million in cash, or 8 or 3 or 1, or it doesn't matter, but now I have cash, and now I have to consider how I'm going to divide my estate. How much is too much to give to children? Do you leave it all to the end, or do you start to transition wealth now? How much money should I leave to charity? But how much is too much to leave to a charity? Should I tell my children that I'm leaving money to charity, or should I just let that be a big surprise along with everything else in my will when I'm not dead, but as I lose capacity because I've got dementia, my power of attorney kicks in? So I really, really owed it to my readers, I think, to write that second book and to answer that question, because it is something that our family has had to deal with 4 times. Going right back to the 1920s, we started businesses and sold them, and then had to deal with the division and the transition of cash, wealth.
You know, in your book, you referred to, you can pass away and with an exclamation mark with the event, or with a question mark. And when you talked about that in your book, that was pretty meaningful to me. So if you indeed didn't want that question mark at the end, you would have had to have some conversation. Somebody would have had to know what was about to happen, and you'd prep people. I think I'm going in the direction of now talking about you're a big proponent of family meetings and getting people prepared for the ultimate being an exclamation mark, rather than saying, holy smokes, what is really going to happen? And by the way, the business wasn't sold. Like, who gets those shares and who gets the pleasure of winding this business up? Because I really don't want to run a pipeline service company. So tell me a little bit about, how do you get there? How do you get to the point where people start understanding? And I guess I'm asking, what's this family meeting, or the meetings that you're talking about? How do you stage them? How do you get there?
Well, it's a really crucial question that you're asking. And the first thing I would respond with is, first of all, you don't get there on your own. So this is not like going to Home Depot and buying some wood and building your own fence. It's a classic do-it-yourself reno job. This is hard. There are so many moving parts in an estate plan. I know, Bob, why 12.5 million Canadians don't have a will. It's intimidating. The whole subject is full of $1 million words in Latin and testator. Like, there's just no common sense. People are intimidated and they're fearful. There's a lot of people who think that if they write a will, like somehow they're going to die, like immediately. Like, there's a lot of superstition. And so I just think that, I think significant families, medium, well-to-do families, I think they have understood, especially in this pandemic, that they need help. And advisors, people like yourself, who have made it your business to help families where they're stuck. And they are clearly stuck. $205 million will be inherited today in Canada. $205 million today, tomorrow, and every day for the next 10 years. There is a tsunami of money that is transitioning from generation to generation, and most of it chaotically, because half of them are missing wills. If they don't have a will, the province of Alberta, every province has a formula for dividing up the business, the canoe, the barbecue, the cash, the RSP. They have a beautiful formula if you're a government, a beautiful formula if you're a government. But I'll tell you, most of the people listening won't be very happy, nor will your family be very happy with that formula.
I'm going to invite one of my panelists in here in a second, but so I was sitting at a lounge a couple of weeks ago with a good buddy of mine, and so we're having a glass of wine, and he pulls out over the napkin and he draws 3 circles on this napkin. The biggest circle is my wealth, if you like, and the other 2 circles, the small ones, are top left-hand side. These are the beneficiaries, and in the other circle, guess who was in that other circle? It was the tax department. And the tax department loves having people pass away. They don't have to say anything. They just sit there waiting for their piece of the whole works. You know, when I saw that diagram, you know, we don't even think of the tax department being one of our beneficiaries, but surely they're just sitting there waiting for you not to have done any planning, and they'll take their piece.
Yep. Oh, have you ever heard a provincial or federal government public service announcement about the importance of writing a will? You'll be waiting a long time. You're absolutely right. They love the chaos. They love the fact that business owners are underinsured. They don't have nearly enough liquidity to pay the capital gains that is triggered on last to survive. They love that chaos. They love it raining down. And And there are certain professions that kind of love when families fight over the ownership of major assets like cottages or businesses.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and the courts in Alberta are jammed full of families fighting, and that is the legacy. And by the way, these fights, this is open court. You and I could just pack up right now and go down to the local courthouse and sit in and listen to a family's dirty laundry.
Yeah, not a whole lot of fun. Richard, I think you may have had a comment or maybe a question to pass in now.
Hi, Tom. We have a question from an audience member, and the question is, in a complicated business, for example, maybe multiple shareholders, who is recommended to be the executor for the estate rather than perhaps the traditional mindset of having a family member as the executor?
Yeah, so here's what I would do. I would hold a family meeting, and one of the best family meeting, one of the first agenda items could be just one issue, selection of an executor. You can build an entire family meeting around that one issue. You would have your advisor present, people like yourself, maybe a lawyer who gives a 5 or 10 minute presentation on the duties of an executor. And then you could say to your family, so having heard that, what do you guys think about who your mother and I should select as an executor? Remember, we've got a business, it's complicated. We may have assets in the US. Listen, this is not an easy job. There are lots of people who think that when their parents select them over their brothers and sisters to be the executor, that somehow they've been bestowed some special status, that mom and dad love them the most. I can tell you that anyone who's performed that duty knows that mom and dad probably love them the least. It is a brutal job. And so increasingly, a lot of people are turning to professional executors, professional trustees to actually administer estates. But more importantly, they're arriving at that decision as a family. In other words, they're not waiting for someone to die and then someone to hunt down a will to find out who the executor is. This has been well discussed and well communicated in advance. So yeah, the answer is always in the room. That's really my message, that when we tease out through conversation with people who are impacted by our death, then we get the best answer.
Tom, many times all the family members aren't available for a family meeting. How do you deal with children that aren't close by, that might be living in other countries? Any comments, any experience with how to deal with that?
Yeah, another silver lining. We're doing it right now. Children who spread out, a diaspora of children, one in Halifax, one in Vancouver, one in Toronto. It is so easy now. Everyone is Zooming. My father is 85 years old. He's turned Zoom into a verb. He asked me when we're Zooming next. It's like, so seriously, it's really easy to have a virtual family meeting, 15 minutes, half an hour. You can tackle one agenda item a month with the advisor, just clicking on, setting it up. Listen, the big message that I'm sharing is how we leave our wealth. I truly believe this is as important as what we leave. When we take great care, when we invest in these conversations and these preparations of the next generation to receive what is surely coming their way, that is what you'll be remembered for, the care.
So Tom, how do I get started though? Not all families are at the stage where they can talk about money openly. It's maybe one of the toughest topics. Is there a different place? Is there a better place to start? Just back me right up to step one. How do I even approach having people come to something I'm going to call a family meeting? I have to show you this. I'm not sure if this is going to come up, but this is a napkin I found in my house, and it basically says it's not a family get together until someone has a meltdown. Okay, so not all situations go smoothly. So do you have questions that maybe I could just start with and then build it going a bit better, or?
So my first piece of advice, having been a speaking resource in dozens and dozens of family meetings. I'm brought in to just talk about my books and then I leave. But I've seen everything. I've seen very formal family meetings. I've seen them at golf courses. I've seen them held at family businesses, in homes, in hotel meeting rooms. They come in every shape and size. I did one recently in Chicago for a Canadian family. 3 generations were in that room, 17 family members. Guess who was chairing that meeting that day? A 15-year-old girl. Now, they've been at this for years, okay? This is a significant family. They are investing heavily in the preparation of the next generation. But for more modest, more modest wealth, just start. They don't have to be formal affairs. Start small, right? We want to start with mom and dad and your kids. And as soon as you can expand and you feel comfortable expanding out to include the spouses of your children, I would encourage you to do that, because their exemption and exclusion from those family meetings is kind of like a big statement. It kind of saying, and by the way, they're getting a version of what's happening in the meeting anyway. And running parallel to a state law is the Family Law Act. So if you've got concerns around, the spending habits of your son's wife or your daughter's husband, get over it. Like, exclude not having a family meeting or pretending that if you don't meet that the problem is going to resolve itself. It's not. In fact, here's the paradox. The more concern people have about having a family meeting, the greater the likelihood that things are going to go off the rails when someone dies. And when I've seen it, when parents are gone, the gloves come off, the glue is gone, and it's lawyer up. And if you think divorce is expensive, that's like a dress rehearsal for the really big show. Estate litigation will grind someone's entire life's work. Tens of millions of dollars can be ground down in litigation, fighting over something that with a little bit of time and a little bit of preparation, leaning on smart people like you to facilitate and help families move through this issue. Oh my gosh, what a great investment of time and money. And I can tell you that when you're in the room, Bob, people tend to behave. In other words, you may no longer have a family business, but now we're talking about the business of family. So these family meetings bring structure and governance and procedure, and there's minutes. Like, there's a formality, and there should be a formality to these family meetings. And guess what? That's how new money becomes old money. It doesn't happen by accident. I can tell you that any old, we hear that expression, right? Oh, they're old money. Well, guess what? They got old because they worked on it. Making money is only part one. Protecting it and transitioning it is part two. And the smart families know that, and they work on it early and often.
I know in your book, you give some questions that you suggest you'd use in a family meeting, and I think even the first question is just a really good one, and that is that you pick a word that describes your family and then give a story about your family. Even if you started the first meeting just with that as the agenda item, might be some way to be a signal to say, okay, there's going to be more of these coming. We're not just going to talk about the weather every time we get together. This is the topic for today, and maybe we could have the next family meeting. It doesn't have to be a year. It doesn't have to be my birthday. It might be 3 months from now. And I'm going to throw another question. On my personal side, I was trying to figure out, what would be the word I described my family, and so I came up with two. One was respect, and I think that was one of your words as well. But in my case, we respected the animals because on the dairy farm, that was our livelihood. We respected equipment, and we also respected neighbors. I remember I was never allowed to go to our one neighbor's place without referring to him as Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell solved all of our problems. And that respect piece is one of my family stories that I wish for my kids and my grandkids to carry forward. And that, I think, is one of the building blocks for us to be able to take this. Just one quick thing, I've been reading a little bit about our Aboriginal people and some of the teachings they have, and they dig back, they talk about 7 generations. So it might be, and I'm not sure if I got this totally right, but You're responsible to pull items and wisdom from 3 generations back. I'm the sandwich piece, and I pass it on for at least 3 to 4 generations going forward. What do you think of that concept?
Oh, I love it. And if you think about the first couple of questions that I'm offering in the book, they're all backward looking questions. Before, in our family meetings, I'm 58, I've been to 53 consecutive family meetings. In our family meetings, before we do anything, before we start talking about wills and tax issues, and before we get in granular, we first of all, we start our family meetings talking about the importance of confidentiality. Like, we spend every meeting, we remind everyone what's going on. So that reminds us that we're part of something special. We revisit our family mission statement. So we've tried to carve out a 100-year vision for our wealth. And then we get into our agenda. It's, you know what, Bob, it's fun. I don't know why this issue is so dark and morose and why we dread it. This can be one of the most, I think, interesting and engaging exercises where we sit down with our kids and say, hey, we've worked really hard. Like, my great-grandfather worked hard, my grandfather worked hard, my father, we were all business owners. I worked really hard, I continue to work hard. And that is not an accident, because we've told stories. We've told stories about how we started our business and how hard we worked and how we have foregone consumption and saved and invested and try to create some opportunity for the next generation. Like, we're telling those stories and embedding those stories in our family culture. After we've done that, then we start talking about wills. You see the order? We look backwards before we look forward. And I think that's what you're alluding to in our First Nations and their approach to not just the transition of money. What's the title of the book? Willing Wisdom. It's about how do we transition something that's actually more valuable than a canoe or a barbecue. It's the stories, it's the values, it's the things that we did wrong that we don't want our children to make the same mistake. It's both the good and the bad that we share. It's the wisdom.
Yeah, once I've lost both parents, and once that happens, you realize that wisdom that went with them, you can't get it. So just a reminder to everybody that if your parents are still alive, it's up to you to have those meaningful conversations and pull that from them, because someday you will wish that you will have done it. And if you need to that kind of confirmation, just give me a call and I'll chat with you about that. You do talk in the book about writing a will as being the most exciting document that you could ever write. Like, Tom, are you for real? Like, give me a break.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you, there was a time. I mean, as a full-time speaker, I would travel the world, and one of my favorite things was to do, especially when I go to New York or big cities, LA, Chicago, is I would go to museums or public libraries where they often have wills. Wills are public documents. They would have wills of famous people, especially in New York. And like under glass, you could read. You would read these old wills and how they were written like love letters. They were full of hope and promise. And they were just not like, these are people who did not go down to Staples and get a will kit for $19 and just bang it out. Check that box, whew, done. These are clearly people who would sit down and they would give like a pen to one child. They'd get like incredibly thoughtful and then describe what they hope that their beneficiaries would go off and do with their wealth, whatever they received. And somewhere along the way, I don't know when, but wills became this technocratic, bureaucratic, morose, depressing thing that no one wanted to do. And I don't know, and I do not understand it.
So,
I don't understand it. They should be when you open the conversation up to your kids and say, hey, listen, your mom and I are wanting to update our wills, and here's what we've been able to accomplish in terms of our wealth, and we'd like to know, what are your thoughts? And then listen. Right?
yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you, you will learn more from your children about what is coming in the future and how they would deploy wealth. It is fascinating. And there's a lot of people who just heard that would go, well, that's just not going to happen. There's no way I'm going to sit there and disclose how much money I've been able to save that I'm going to leave my children, because if they hear they're going to get 1 million or 3 or 30, they're immediately going to head to the couch and watch reruns of Oprah or play Xbox. Like, it's going to take away their drive and ambition. It's going to blunt their, I don't know who they're meant to be. And I'm like, I don't get, that is such a quintessential Canadian myth. Keep everything secret, because if we die tomorrow and they find out, they'll somehow magically become really well prepared.
But there are some stats about people that win lotteries and win gifts or are just given a gift. Very often those aren't managed very, very well. I'm going to let my one of my panelists, Trevor Lukey, jump in. I believe he has a question.
Yeah, I do. Nice to see you again, Tom. I had a really quick question here, and it's really about the awkwardness surrounding these conversations. You know, in my family in particular, I've got some extended family that is very uncomfortable talking about death, talking about anything to do with death. And so I think of how do you start those conversations, and how do you make the family comfortable with, because they don't see the will, this whole process is, okay, this is what I want to do with my wealth. I want to share a story. They see it as facing their parents' death.
Yes.
And for some people, it's just something they can't do. What are some strategies around that?
Yeah, great question. So here's what I would do if we've got some younger people on this call today. One of the great ways to start the conversation is to get your own will done, and then give your parents a copy of your own will and say, hey, listen, nothing says we die in order. And I just, you know, if something happens to me, I just want you to be prepared. And so what often happens is parents reciprocate. It's very weird when children parent their own parents on the subject of estate planning. But basically what that does is it says to the parents, look, there's more to estate planning than just dividing up your assets when you're dead. There's a part of estate planning that is very much about the next generation serving their parents while they're still alive, but incapacitated, right? This is why 12 million Canadians don't have wills. They think, man, it's just other people getting my stuff. So I think I'll just kick that can down the road. What I come along and say is, oh, dude, listen very carefully. If you don't have a will, you don't have a healthcare power of attorney, you tell me how your children are going to advocate for you while you're on a respirator with COVID. They can't. Estate planning is about the living. It's very much about the living. And I think kids can remind parents about that, especially now. And I think parents can broach the subject equally effectively by saying to the kids, look, we don't want to be one of those families where we die and then everyone goes hunting for a will, tearing the house apart. We'd actually like to have a family meeting with our advisors present, our trusted advisor present, and we want to start sharing our documents and having your input. We want you to be prepared. We want you to know who our executor is and who our backup executor is, who our power of attorney is and backup power of attorney. We want to not only tell you who that is, but discuss it and share our documents so there are no surprises. Well, what do you know? Guess what's going to happen? Family are going to talk. They're going to talk and they're going to plan. And when they're talking and planning, I'll tell you right now, they're going to be saving tax.
So the ultimate.
You see the order? It wasn't, hey, let's have a family meeting and start talking about saving tax. It's, let's have a family meeting, strip away all the secrecy and get at what's really important. And then guess what? The tax opportunities emerge. That's the right order.
Yeah, I love that method of tax planning, Tom. It's like anybody that runs a business. If you run a business for the purpose of insurance proceeds or some kind of program, and not run the business because we love the business or whatever it might be, first of all, decide on that you're going to run the business, or in this case, do some planning about where the assets go. Then talk about the tax plan and then decide what are the pieces that are going to make this thing work and holistic, and how do we end up with the maximum for the family unit. That's the right order, rather than the other order being, well, here's some tools. We're going to use this tool and we're going to force the family into this tax tool. It makes no sense. It makes zero sense.
Oh, wise words indeed. Wise words indeed.
I want to go back to the family meeting again, Tom. I was reading a leadership book, and it was talking about a true leader poses the question and lets everybody do all the talking, and no matter whether how you would disagree with the comments around the table. These might be family members, might be whoever. You cannot let on that you're agreeing or disagreeing or whatever. Your job as a leader, and maybe the person that's drafting the will here, is to just listen and observe and learn. Any comments?
Remember I referenced that meeting in Chicago with the 15-year-old girl, third generation, chairing the meeting? Seriously, I could barely figure out who had the power and money in that room. That family meeting wasn't about them. It was all about creating space and room for the next generation to express their own aspirations and their own dreams, and to articulate that with some coaching and some help. I mean, these were amazing. These are amazing meetings. When people can overcome their fear of aging and dying and being this solitary thing, it's a miracle when families can use their surplus wealth to actually deepen and engage the next generation and build trust and respect.
So you're saying that once I've finished listening, this is the way I'm thinking of it. Once I'm finished listening, I summarize, I've got some other thoughts.
Yes.
At that point, maybe I start redrafting my will and trying to match what I heard. And
Yes.
and maybe that changes next year. Maybe it changes 6 months from now.
Yeah, just because we disclose in our family what our will is, we always reserve the opportunity to change our will. It just says that if we die tomorrow, there are no surprises, because listen, I have a copy of my parents' will. My parents have a copy of my will. Our kids, when they turn 18, we buy them wills. They're very disappointed. They're hoping for cars. They get wills. We don't,
Tom,
we don't go to the lawyer with our 18-year-old kids and hold their hand. We say, you're an adult, and part of being an adult means that you go and get a will. Get them to send the invoice to us. Pick any lawyer you want. You can use ours if you want. There's some advantages of using the same accountant, the same lawyer, the same wealth advisor. When those advisors are interceding and they have a multi-generational view of that family and how the wealth has been created, I know you can do your best work when you've got 3 generations in one room. There's things that you can do that you can't do when you're just dealing with one silo, one generation. But
right.
That's what we do. We share our documents. I seriously do not know what all the fuss is. I'll tell you what, I have a theory why people write a will and then keep it secret. Because that's what their parents did. If their parents even had a will, this has always been a problem. There's something called family systems theory. We repeat what our parents did. And I know you've got clients, and I know there's people listening who are really the first generation of real serious wealth creators. And you know what? They are going to die with more money than they need, and they are certainly going to die with more money than their parents ever had. And you know what? They're treating their estate the exact same way that their parents, who had nothing to divide, they're treating it the same way.
Yeah.
So part of what I'm doing is it's a call to action for the first generation of wealth creators to understand you're not your parents. You have to provide leadership. We have lost touch with what that word patriarch and matriarch mean. It sounds like an old-fashioned word, like you've got to have big iron gates and some big rolling estate, and I'm a patriarch. There was a time, and it's not that long ago, about a generation, 2 generations ago, when old people spoke. You and I know we're of a certain generation. When someone old spoke, we listened. We were taught to listen because we knew that they had hard-fought wisdom. And we could listen or we could ignore it. I'll tell you, that has slipped away out of our popular culture. And now if you're old and you're not making money, you're kind of kicked to the curb. And I'll tell you, it's dangerous. And part of what I'm trying to do is resurrect that role of the matriarch and patriarch, and to give them that sense of identity and tell them that that role that they perform, that last role that they perform, where they really prepare the next generation to receive wealth, because inherited wealth will do one of two things. It will accelerate demise, or it will release potential. It will accelerate addictions and poor spending habits, or it will accelerate new businesses to be created. And it will fund education and healthcare. It will not equivocate. It will do one or the other. And I think the role of matriarchs and patriarchs, the duty that we have when we create wealth, is to then do the next responsible thing is, and that is to explore what we have in our own family. And if we've got some serious challenges with addictions and spending problems, then you know and I know that there are technical solutions called trusts to protect them from themselves.
Right. I love it. I'm going to invite Darlene in a second to ask another question. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine that was facilitating once again in their Aboriginal scene. And she had said that it's pretty cool to watch the elders when they speak. Nobody speaks until the elder says thank you, and that's the signal that he's or she is finished speaking. You know, there's a lot to be learned about how we communicate, how we listen, and the respect piece. There's just a lot that we need to remind ourselves about. And now, just going back to your just previous comment, if I'm in that family meeting, realizing that, man, my responsibility is to take this forward, not only just for myself, but for my kids or my grandkids. That's the third, fourth generation out. And so this is the vision, this is the legacy that our wealth generating generation, like my parents were trying to get to. That's a lot of responsibility. It takes a while to wrap your head around that. And luckily, your children are going to have many years to figure that out and then be able to say, not a question mark at the end, but an exclamation mark. Here we go. Here's the next step. Darlene, do you have a question? Would you like to jump in?
I do. Thank you. Thanks, Tom. So this is one of the questions from one of the attendees, which I think is a fabulous question. So you have these meetings and you share the contents of the will. You've never done this before, and perhaps your family is getting along just fine. So when you do this, how do you avoid the possible situation where the kids start fighting with each other outside of it, or starting to try to influence the parents to change their wills and maybe make it so that it's more beneficial to them? So how do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, by having advisors in the room, there is that formality. And I have to tell you, people tend to behave. So it's always interesting for someone to have a public persona, and then if they have some other agenda that they start articulating outside the family meeting, kind of everyone sees that for what it is. One of the best qualities of a family meeting is everyone hears the same thing at the same time. So, you know, part of what these questions in the book are doing is they're circular. You're going around the room and you're asking people to participate. And if they've got a beef, get it out there. Like, seriously, silence is the great destroyer of family wealth. It's not people who keep their opinions to themselves and wait for someone to die and then lawyer up. I mean, that's happening all the time. The question is, aren't we capable of something better? I mean, business owners especially understand what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is you make money in business by taking measured risks. And I'm saying that successful families protect wealth and transition wealth to the next generation. Guess what? By taking risks. And these family meetings that I'm describing, it feels like a risk, and it is a risk. And guess what happens when you take a risk? The opportunity for reward is waiting for you. It may be more difficult for some families than others, but ignoring it doesn't make the problem go away. That you even made an effort to communicate and open up dialogue around the transition of assets, that is more than most people do. And that will always provide the context for the administration of an estate, especially if there's minutes taken. In many cases, these wills that get discussed and then drafted or updated as a result of a family meeting become really bulletproof. can you imagine someone appearing before a judge saying, I'm really unhappy with my inheritance, judge. My parents, who had 16 annual family meetings and never really altered their giving decisions or logic. Yeah, I just think this is so unfair. That is not an impetuous will. That is not a will that has been crafted with someone exercising undue influence or someone who lacked capacity. Do you know that 95% of the litigation in this country is captured by those two things? Someone had undue influence, usually a child who is providing late in life care, maybe living in the same home with mom and dad, gets them to amend their will late in life, they get more. Shocking, happens all the time. Or mom and dad made a change to their will late in life when they lack capacity. Those two scenarios capture about 95% of the litigation. A family meeting addresses both, dead on. There's no undue influence because everyone's there. Everyone hears the same thing. Everyone hears who's going to get the canoe. So this idea of, no family meeting and then someone saying, hey, brother and sister, guess what? Dad promised me the boat. Like, he said that I love the boat the most, and I do love that boat, and he promised me the boat. Everyone would go, dude, we had 16 family meetings. We all know who gets the boat. Zip it. It is the disclosure and transparency that brings peace to the family. Is it easy? Sometimes it's tricky, but that's why you have advisors. Lean on your advisors, make them work. They want to do this. There is no joy in being an advisor and watching a family grow wealth and then blow it up because they failed to do that last piece, the family meeting.
Oh, Tom, it's tough being an advisor watching a family go through major trauma. Number one, they're grieving, and then even part of that grieving process, then all of a sudden, all of this other stuff starts happening, and oh my God, these things that were actually cast in stone. Like, there were transactions that were done many years ago. There's no undoing those transactions, but they're not known to all the family members. I want to move forward a bit. In your book, and you refer to it a bit, you have some tools that you've created to help get started and to help through this thought process. And I think you call one of these the Willing Wisdom Index. So tell me about the index and how you use it and how does that help?
I really call the Willing Wisdom Index the ultimate estate planning checklist. It is, now, Bob, it's going to take 8 minutes of your life. This is 8 minutes of your life you'll never get back. But after spending 8 minutes of your life, it's going to reveal all the really great things that you've done with your estate plan and some of the gaps that may be in your estate plan. 8 minutes, click, 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 20-page personalized report that helps you start family conversations, make major decisions. And so when you go visit your lawyer, you don't have a 3-hour meeting, you got a 30-minute meeting because you've made some major decisions. You've got the spelling of your executor's name. You've got the backup executor, power of attorney, backup power of attorney. You've made all these decisions. Those are short meetings with lawyers. Guess what short meetings with lawyers means?
Less fees.
Less fees. And I know that you have subscribed to this tool, and I know you're sharing this tool with your clients, and it's a remarkable gift. I should just let people know that if you're coming to my website for this tool, it's $200. So every time you're sharing this tool with a client, you're really giving them a $200 gift. This report that gets generated is confidential. We do not want your last name. Make up a screen name. Call yourself Elvis. Seriously, no one, I don't want to say no one cares about your results. But what I want to say is just know that this is confidential and you're anonymous. That way you can answer the questions on the checklist accurately and honestly. Don't try to impress anyone. It's not about impressing anyone. When you answer the questions really honestly, the software will produce just phenomenal recommendations to help you reduce your legal fees and really close the gaps in your estate plan. Really get and implement all the things that we've talked about today.
So everybody, there will be a link to the index. It will be on our website. Once again, this is being recorded, so please share this recording with your friends and business colleagues. The link for the Willing Wisdom Index will also be there on the website. Go to our website and go to the seminars page, and the link for the index will be there. And we, of course, would love to help you think through that and be your advisors and to move forward. I'm going to open up to the panelists again. If they have any other questions, feel free to jump in and ask another question or two. I'm going to ask you, Tom, in a second for some action points, and what are the 2 or 3 things that really every participant on this call ought to do as soon as they click the leave meeting.
Well, that's just, for me, that's just straightforward. If you don't have a will, absolutely book an appointment and get one done. Do not make the goal of the perfect will. There is no such thing as a perfect will. It's not one and done, right? Like get it, put it in the drawer, and then right, you've done estate planning, that thing, that right. Constantly revisit, but get something in place. Something is better than nothing. Right. Secondly, if you have a will, please make sure that it is, just read it and review it and make sure that it's up to date. There are some people on this call right now, I guarantee that their named executor is dead. 1968, when Bobby Kennedy took a bullet in Los Angeles, that was pretty horrific. He had a will. That's the good news. Bad news is, who do you think his executor was? John F. Kennedy, assassinated 5 years earlier, never updated the will. And Bobby Kennedy wasn't just a lawyer, he was the Attorney General. Half of all lawyers don't have a will. 4 US presidents died without a will. 2 of them were lawyers. No one is going to push you to get this done. Seriously, no one's going to email you or call you to remind you. You have to do this yourself. It is your will, your willingness to leave your wisdom. That's all I ask. Just don't be one of those 12 million Canadians who is going to be a train wreck.
Right. Richard, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I have another one. During the family meetings, as you're discussing the family history, et cetera, and you're talking about words that describe the family, what if you end up in a situation where perhaps the beneficiaries or the next generations maybe don't share the same values or the same ideas or don't have the same, maybe just don't, perhaps you're not trusting that they're going to carry the legacy forward in the way that you intended to. Is there a discussion that takes place right at that time, or is this really just let's just listen and wait, and next year let's ask the questions again and see if the learning happens over time, or is this, do you deal with it head on at that moment? What takes place?
I think I would listen, and I think it would help inform you on how you would build your estate today, or update your estate plan, your will, or your power of. Can you imagine having maybe a child where there is some real dissonance and a falling out? They're in the family meeting, and it's becoming abundantly clear that they're not in a good place. They're not in a place where they can handle wealth if something were to happen to you, or in a good place to advocate for your health if you find yourself incapacitated. And yet you look at your documents and you go, my goodness, they've been named as our healthcare power of attorney. Like, there's some shocking revelations that come when we find that we have challenging family relationships. I mean, the very first thing I would do is update those documents to reflect the current condition of the state of those relationships. And here's just a general rule. We often tend to call things that they're not. For example, if anyone is wondering when is a good time to use a trust in estate planning, it's usually when we lack, say it, trust. As a general rule. Yeah. So if trusts feel like they're fancy and they're complicated and people don't understand what they are, if you're wondering if you're a good candidate for a trust, ask yourself, do I have something going on in a family dynamic or relationship where I actually don't have that trust? I actually have some concern. Talk to your advisors. They'll know what is appropriate to deal with that. And remember, sometimes relationships repair and those trusts can be modified.
Yeah, I've seen the use of trust being very effective, and in some cases where some family members really don't want to have the responsibility, or just want somebody else to look after this. I just not, it's just not me, Bob. I need somebody else to take this piece or to monitor this so that I know that that family member will be looked after in the long run. And sometimes might be a disability or whatever it might be. But I just want to know that for that next generation, even, that I've done my best to deal with that situation.
Right. So a good example would be, equality is kind of a core value in all of our estate planning in our family, and it's something we've worked on, and I think it explains why there's been no litigation over the course of 4 generations, because equality is like a bedrock. But listen,
Hang on a second, Tom. So equality, is that a different word than fairness? I think we're leading into our next seminar.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I want to talk about this some more, so you're going to describe fair and what's equality.
Okay,
but
so
maybe give us a teaser for what we're going to be talking about next time.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to wind up. Let's imagine a family's got two children. They have one child, a daughter who has a MBA from Harvard. Super smart, hardworking, capable, competent, driven. And they have a son who has a serious addiction. No drive, no ambition. What I'm talking about in Willing Wisdom is you can absolutely leave them an equal amount of wealth. You just leave it differently. The child with the addiction problem, it's left in trust where the trustee is instructed, and this is all communicated, right? So sometimes people get healthy and the trustee would be able to release wealth, but the Harvard MBA daughter, she gets her money in real dollars in real time when someone dies. That is an equal estate. Is it fair? It may not look fair, but it is equal. But wealth will harm someone or it won't harm someone. It will release potential or it will accelerate demise. So what I'm talking about in family meetings is not some kind of Norman Rockwell painting where everything is just fantastic and easy. It's uncovering these challenges, but still maintaining the concept of equality, but perhaps in ways that also deal with the issue of fairness in a kind of more obtuse way. But the key part is the communication, so that when mom and dad die, the daughter and the son don't project their dissonance on each other. We don't blame others for the giving decisions of our parent. Not in our family. We know who made those decisions based on full and repetitive conversations. That's a great gift. Building families that work well when we are not here. That is our legacy. That's the role of patriarchs and matriarchs.
Well, that's a terrific goal. I do want to revisit this fairness equality thing. Don't think I'm totally buying in yet. I need to figure that out a bit more. I do want to chat with you a bit more about that. I do want to remind everybody as we wind this up that the book that we're talking about is called Willing Wisdom. Many of you already have the book. If you do not have the book, we will send you a copy of the book gratis. It's for free. Just go on our website, send me an email, or send it to info@hlh.cpa or hlhcpa.com and ask for a copy of the book. Just also remember that the Willing Wisdom Index will also be on our website. There will be a link there to find that. I think we have a great call to action. Fill out the index, give us a call, get a hold of the book. You've got to read the book. Trust me, you've got to read this book multiple times. I've read it now 4 times. I think one of the things that causes us not to do some of these things, Tom, is that it's so daunting. It feels so overwhelming. But really, once you start, it's like cleaning your house. Once you start, you have a small bit done, and then you get a little bit more done. You feel good about yourself, and you go further. So, Tom, I'm going to leave the last words to you, and we'll wrap this up.
Well, I'm going to leave on a positive note, and I'm going to continue that thought. I tell you, whenever I update my will and I come out of my lawyer's office, I feel so great. I feel like I've done something. It's not about me. It's about my family. It's about the people who matter most in my life. And it is incredibly gratifying. It is really satisfying work that transcends just buying another thing. It's working on something that is so important. It's this thing called family.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thanks for everybody for participating. See you in 2 weeks.
Cheers.